Hark, beware! There is a storm about tonight, and we're rolling in the deep with the waves, thunder and lightning. The winds are ripping through the sails, and the ship is being tossed about like a rag doll amid the waves. On nights like this, it's easy to think you've seen a ship or two that might not wholly be there. I'm Kate.
And I'm Renee. And this time, on Into the Silent World, a podcast about all things nautical and historical for lovers of maritime myth and archaeology, with a side of spooky, let us gather round the mess deck and share a story or two until the gale abates. Tales of ships that are seen but not there. Sailing without a crew and sailing after they've been wrecked and sunk to the depths.
Previously, we've charted the realm of sea monsters, those creatures and cryptids of the shallows and shadowy depths that have sparked curious tales and are embedded within oral histories the world over, especially including here in our little patch of the Pacific. But today we're navigating a bit closer to the mortal realm and turning our telescopes to spy across the seas and through the veil to the ships that haunt the waves. Phantom pilots, cursed crews, mysterious disappearances, and puzzling reports of reappearances. So Renee, what do you picture when I say ghost ship?
I think I'm a little bit influenced by Pirates of the Caribbean type films, but almost like a silhouette of a ship that when you look directly at it, it sort of doesn't quite seem to stand out from the waves or from like a cloudy, stormy sky. It's there, but it's not, and it only becomes a bit sharper once you turn away from it. So in your peripheral vision, it becomes a bit sharper, but as soon as you look there, it kind of fades into its surroundings. And so I think that's what makes it really, really creepy and really, really scary. The fact that it's not quite there. You're not quite sure what you're looking at or what it's doing. It's a bit off to the side.
I always picture a tall ship with some very dishevelled sails on the rigging.
Definitely a terrifying vision because it's something that shouldn't look like that and still be sailing. If it's that dishevelled, it should just be on a shore or in the depths. So why is it still sailing?
The most famous ghost ship tales tend to come from the Age of Sail, which was approximately from the mid-16th century to the 19th century. And much like our sea monsters, the folklore of the ghost ship traces the developments of seafaring and the role of ships at sea, as trade vessels, as migrant ships, and, well, kind of prove that sailors tend to be a rather superstitious bunch. If something weird, bad, or unfortunate befell a vessel, it was common, nay customary, to attach some element to the supernatural.
Sailors of yore were also kind of known for the love of a good yarn and, well, gossip. Tales of ghost ships were a popular genre for sailors to tell. The sheer number of ghost ship stories, SV Seabird, SS Valencia, and HMS... Did you really have to give me a really hard name like this?
Yes, I did.
The sheer number of ghost ship stories, for example, SV Seabird, SS Valencia, and HMS Eurydice, to name a few, is a testament to the power of this folklore to spook, scare, and seek to, if not explain the supernatural, at least note it with a hint of caution and awe. As Peter D. Jeans notes in Seafaring Lore and Legend, people often prefer to have and to hold onto an enigma, an inexplicable puzzle.
The traditional ghost ship tale tends to fall into two categories. That of an abandoned or derelict vessel that is found to have no living crew aboard. They are missing or feared dead. Or the other, that the ship appears mysteriously, sometimes crewed by ghosts or phantoms, and other times uncrewed, but it is still crossing the seas. As was the case for the legendary Mary Celeste from 1872, if there was a prototypical ghost ship, this creepy story is perhaps the best of them all. It has all the tropes and was extremely popular in the later half of the 19th century. A report in the Rockhampton Bulletin from Queensland in May 1873 tells the tale, specifically a column from a London gossip written by Our Lady correspondent, and it says,
"A strange and terrible story of the sea has been reported. An American vessel, the Mary Celeste, was found drifting about at sea. Not having a living creature was in her. But there was evidence that a lady and a child had been aboard, and blood was discovered on the rails of the quarterdeck. Mutiny and murder, of course, are summarised, and subsequent desertion by the crew. What materials for romance reality continuously presents us with." And another, less sensational, emotive mention in the Evening News, Sydney, 12th April 1873, says,
"A mystery of the sea. The Gibraltar Chronicle related a story which is given a hint to Edgar Allan Poe or Coleridge. The Dagartia, a British ship, on the 5th December, fell in with an American brigantine, the Mary Celeste. The master boarded her and found her to be abandoned from no apparent cause. She was perfectly sound and had suffered from no storm. A small phial filled with oil being found perpendicular, and nothing whatsoever had been injured. A sword which was in the cabin was found to be smeared with blood, and the top gallant rail had marks of blood on it, and both bows of the vessel had been cut with some sharp instrument. The captain's effects were of value, but still present, and there had been a lady and a child on board. It is not mentioned whether the boats were gone, but the theory seemed to be that of the crew, or part of them, had murdered the captain, had run the vessel towards Azores, and escaped in the boats, carrying off the lady and child with them."
Naturally, several theories emerged regarding this situation. Once the ship was recovered, salvage hearings were held in Gibraltar. There was no evidence for any of these, but some of the scenarios presented include foul play and mutiny, or an act of piracy by an unknown culprit, or the crew of De Gratia, the ship that found Mary Celeste, allegedly drifting with no one on board, or perhaps dodgy insurance and salvage fraud. Consequently, the salvage award was quite small. None of this was conclusive, and over time the story took on more and more details, some of which could sound plausible and some were just fantasy. But hey, when you don't know what has occurred, you can't really dismiss things like fumes rising from the cargo, specifically alcohol fumes, underwater earthquakes, water spouts, or theories more supernatural in nature, such as an attack by a giant squid. The Kraken strikes again, Kate! It strikes again!
It's always the Kraken!
It's always the Kraken! Once the court hearings were done and dusted, the ship passed on to new owners and continued to operate. But in 1885, 11 or maybe 12 years after the whole abandonment ordeal, Mary Celeste was deliberately wrecked off the coast of Haiti by her captain. Likely an insurance fraud job.
Talk about a chain of ghost story whispers.
Mm-hmm.
While I was researching this, one of my favourite descriptions of the Mary Celeste being cited by the crew that found her was she was in a dishevelled but seaworthy condition under partial sail with her lifeboat missing.
A bit like us coming out of lockdown.
Yep. Also, the stories of the Mary Celeste were reprinted in the Aussie papers several times, and you actually see the popularity of it increase, particularly in certain decades. And yet they're still often reprinted from London sources, such as our first reading, which, aside from filling up column inches, are a bit of 19th century clickbait. You'll never guess what happened to this ship.
Ooh, I want to know more. I'm going to buy this newspaper.
Yes, exactly.
But how could a ship keep sailing without a crew? What's the reality of this? I think
Ghosts.
ghosts. That's the reality of this.
Sorry. Do we have an explanation?
Well, maybe, yes.
Ooh.
Okay. So we have a bit of science to explain this whole thing. In fact, it seems to be a combination of weather and physics and an interplay of buoyancy and fluid dynamics. So the weight of the water in the hull wasn't enough to sink the ship, but it is now theorized that the crew of the Mary Celeste abandoned the ship fearing it was in the process of sinking. An improvised sounding rod was found along with a significant but not sinkable amount of water in the hold, about 1.1 metres, as was reported. There is a wonderful short TED Ed video explaining this with some good graphics and animation, so we'll put that in the show notes. Check that out.
And where can you find the show notes?
You can find the show notes on silentworldfoundation.org.au/podcast.
And be sure to click on the notes for episode 3.
Yeah.
No, 4. It's episode 4.
Yeah, click on 3.
Yeah.
Say that again and be sure. Yeah.
And be sure to click on episode 4 to actually see it. Just scroll down the page. It'll be there. But I want to touch on the fact that after the initial reports, which were, rather, as we heard, rather sensational, the story got a second wind in its sail in 1884 when a young ship surgeon turned writer fictionalised the story and tweaked the supernatural eerie aspects of it and the name of the ship to the more French-sounding Marie Celeste, in a popular short story that was published anonymously, but in the respected Cornhill magazine. See, sailors, or ship surgeons in this case, just love to tell a good ghost ship story.
Oh, yeah.
And I have to say, the illustrations that accompanied the story were very Edgar Allan Poe indeed. So many doomed sailors. So Arthur Conan Doyle's short story proved to be so popular that until this day it is often still thought that the Marie Celeste is the real story, rather than the actual Mary Celeste.
Ah, that's really weird. So it's taken on this fantasy story that people take to be fact, whereas the real background to the shipwreck is actually also quite amazing.
Creepy. Still creepy.
Still creepy.
Still creepy.
That's the thing, yeah.
But it's definitely one of the ghost ships that actually does have a historical root to it.
Yes.
There are several very famous ghost ship stories that, again, because they're printed in so many papers as reader clickbait of the 19th century, we're not entirely sure if it actually relates to a real ship.
So, of course, we can't cover ghost ships without touching on the other famed ship and crew of the Flying Dutchman, a ship doomed to traverse the seas for eternity, and which, if sighted, foretells of danger to your crew. Like Mary Celeste, the popularity of this tale means it made many appearances in the papers of colonial Australia. More clickbait. More ye olde clickbait.
It is also a ghost ship that seemed to be known all over the world, but is said to only haunt the southern hemisphere, particularly the Dutch trading route from around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa, across the Indian Ocean and up to Java, or what is modern Indonesia. Remember, when following this route, to turn north after the Roaring Forties, but before you accidentally hit the West Australian coast.
Yeah, a lot of people made that mistake.
Especially the Batavia. Now, there are many, many, many retellings of the Flying Dutchman, and the details vary. The captain's name changes. The curse itself changes. Sometimes it's God damning them, and other times, in some, it's the devil. Sometimes the crew are sailors, and other times just a band of pirates. But today we're going to recite a few more lines, from Peter Jean's seafaring lore and legend, just because, well, you couldn't beat the drama and the imagery. So take it away, Renee.
Perhaps the most commonly accepted one tells of the Dutch skipper Captain Cornelius van der Decken, who, on a voyage home to the Netherlands from Batavia in the era of Admiral Martin Tromp, ran into foul weather in the latitude of the Cape of Good Hope. After many weeks of thrashing hopelessly westward, the crew begs van der Decken to wait until the weather moderates, but the Dutchman is adamant. He intends to carry on. Then God appears in the midst of a particularly violent gale. The crew throw themselves to the deck. Seamen have always been pious, albeit hopelessly naive, unlettered, and sometimes coldly brutal. But van der Decken remains standing on his poop deck, defying the Almighty, going so far as to fire his pistol at the vision in the clouds and swearing by Donner and Blitzen, a Teutonic oath, Donner und Blitzen, thunder and lightning, somewhat stronger than the English Hell's Bells, that despite God's wrath he would beat his way into Table Bay, where Cape Town lies. God, willing to accept only so much impious passion, exacts retribution on the Dutchman by making him sail the seas forever without rest. No sooner are the words out of van der Decken's mouth than the vessel founders beneath him, leaving only a phantom ship condemned to sail for all eternity, beating back and forth in a futile attempt to reach Table Bay. Roger's account has it that the ghost ship sails with only van der Decken and one other man as crew, and he a monster. Other variations include the Flying Dutchman pursuing other ships until they are overtaken, whereupon van der Decken can be seen leaning across the rail of his quarterdeck, holding aloft a letter and screaming that he wishes to have it posted. But nobody will accept the commission, it being a firm belief among sailors that to do so would doom them to perpetual bad luck. Hence the universal insistence among seamen that the phantom ship, if ever sighted, be given the widest possible berth. Another belief is that any seaman setting eyes on such a ship would be struck blind. Rogers remarks that there has been no dearth of witnesses who insist that they themselves had laid their eyes on this ghost ship as it endlessly battles its way around the Cape of Good Hope, the Cape of Storms in the old parlance.
Like the Mary Celeste, the Flying Dutchman is a favourite and well known in its own right. Again, you see the retellings and popularity for this one wax and wane, but this one is cited around the world, or reported to be cited around the world, again underscoring the use of ships to connect cultures across the seas with trade and migration. And I also think particularly the path that the Flying Dutchman is said to particularly haunt, that shipping route from around the Cape of Good Hope up to Java, says something about the power of the Dutch East India Company, or the VOC.
Yes, I also saw a story about a sighting of the Flying Dutchman to do with the wreck of the General Grant of American Civil War fame, named after General Grant. This ship that wrecked in New Zealand, but apparently it wrecked after it had been followed for 2 days by a phantom ship, and a lot of the people on board identified this to be the Flying Dutchman.
Ooh.
And then the ship wrecked, and the survivors ended up getting into a boat, and I think, pulled up on Disappointment Island.
I love the name of that island.
Fitting. Yeah, so even down in this neck of the woods, not just up, along that pathway, just in this general area, it seems to, as you said, the world over, it's captured the imagination and really embodied that foreboding, that fear that comes with seeing weird apparitions at sea. It's really been instilled in the sailors, but also those who, perhaps passengers. It's just this like fear, like if we see this phantom on the ocean, we're done for. That's it. We're never going to make it. Abandon all hope, basically, at the Cape of Good Hope. Yeah.
But a possible explanation for some ghost ships are mirages, or an optical illusion also called a fata morgana, which, God, I just love that phrase. This optical effect, known as looming, occurs when rays of light are bent across different refractive indices. That's so technical. The light bending around the horizon and the different densities and temperatures of the air above the sea. So this could make a ship just off the horizon appear to be hoisted far up in the air. And there was an example of this a few years ago that actually went viral on the internet off the Cornish coast. Again, linked to in the show notes. But this picture shows a large container ship seemingly hanging above the water, floating in the sky. And moreover, this same effect can also cause ships to appear upside down while they're hanging in the sky, which I think probably would have tripped a few sailors back in the day.
Oh, physics. Science.
And if you're seeing ghost ships around the world, like the Flying Dutchman, they could have been caused by ocean currents or ocean gyres. This is influenced by temperature, salinity, wind, gravity, and also the rotation of the Earth, making these ocean rivers carry the waterways of the world around and moving in what we now know are predictable patterns. But these ocean rivers could have been the crew that caused the abandoned or derelict ships to seemingly sail the oceans.
Nowadays, the Bureau of Meteorology and similar departments or research institutions around the world use a variety of methods and probes to track, trace, and record these movements. Sailors in the age of sail knew these currents existed but didn't possess the equipment to measure or understand them. So instead, the ships were said to be crewed by phantoms.
We do get modern examples of this, of ships drifting on ocean currents. So, modern ghost ships. These tend to be abandoned or refloated decommissioned vessels. And in 2006, there was actually a tanker, which, probably pronouncing this wrong, was the Yang Sing, and it was found 180 kilometres southwest of Weipa in the Gulf of Carpentaria, across the north of Australia, if you're looking at us on the map. And when Australian customs officers boarded it, the engines were not in working condition. There was no crew aboard. However, there was a large quantity of rice, enough to feed a crew for several days. And it was eventually determined that this ship was likely a resupply vessel that had been used just outside of Australia's waters and had literally just come unstuck and drifted into Australian waters after its crew had left it.
Ah, it appears that the wind is dying down.
The tempest is passing. But wait, Renee, do you see that? A light ahead. Could it be, possibly, a haunted lighthouse?
Until next time, remember, if you do come across a ghost ship or phantom pilot, don't accept the mail.
Or else you'll be damned for all eternity. stuck with Dutch shipmen.
With Dutch,
Sorry, 17th century Dutch shipmen.
and a lot of mail. A lot of ghost ship mail. I've been Renee.
And I've been Kate. Join us next time when we take our chances on the rocky shores to investigate the mystery of a haunted lighthouse or two.
All hands!
Into the Silent World is a Silent World Foundation podcast. Researched, written, recorded, and edited by Kate Pentecost and Renee Maliaros. If you'd like to keep up with all the mayhem around here, be sure to follow and like the Silent World Foundation on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Our thanks to the Mutineers, Sydney's leading pirate band, for our top-notch, ship-shape theme songs. And special thanks to Paul Huntley for helping us pronounce stuff well.
Team.
Brittine. Thank you.
Finish this sentence.
Finish the sentence. Thank you, Paul. Brigantine?
Brigantine.
Brigantine.
Yeah,
Sorry.
brigantine.
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 Perhaps the most commonly accepted one tells of the Dutch skipper, Captain Cornelius. Why? I was saying this so good before. Is it Van der Decken?
Vanderdecken.
Van der Decken. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Back to the first paragraph where you started.
Did I say the ship wrong?
Wax and wane?
Yeah.
I think I heard wax and rain.
Oh.
And I didn't want to stop you.
That's
because I'm not sure.
Thank you. I probably did.
Go back.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. We're